when I was going in high school, I mean, I always knew what some of the issues were because I used to see it in television. Mostly the African American movement, you know, the Martin Luther King movement. But I really wasn't that aware. It wasn't until I came to the University of Washington that I realized, you know, what some of the issues were and how similar the problems were between the African Americans and the Chicanos that were living in this country. And so it wasn't really until the University of Washington experience that I became fully aware as to what the issues were.
What were some of the issues that you saw during that time?
Well, you know, the biggest issue was racism, as far as I was concerned. The discrimination that occurred in this country with the Latino community or the Chicano community. I mean, we were a second-class citizen, and I remember coming from Texas, in parts of Texas where the discrimination was so pronounced it was unbelievable. I mean, I still remember the signs: "No Mexicans allowed" in a restaurant. I mean, this is in the mid 50s, late 50s, 58, 59. I mean, back then, you would have thought that by then, you know, that wouldn't occur, but it was occurring. I remember also in Washington State, growing up and going to high school, we were different. We were treated different by the high school students, by the Caucasian high school students. We were completely disliked, like we didn't really belong. I remember going to the cafeteria and eating lunch my freshman year, because that was really the first time that I stayed in Eastern Washington. We used to go back every year, except in 1965 when I turned 15. It was my freshman year in high school. The hardest thing my dad did, because I was able to graduate, I was the first one to graduate from high school. But I remember not knowing anyone, going to high school. There was 5 other Chicanos in my high school class. And naturally, you sort of, you're lost, you're being looked at, that you're different, you're being told you're different, and so you try to associate with the people that understand you. And so I remember eating lunch with them, 5 of us, and we were eating lunch, and a sandwich would fly over to our, you know, to where we were at, and you would look around to see who did it, and everybody just kind of, and nobody, you know, they just pretend like no one threw it. I mean, we hadn't done anything. It was just a dislike, it was just the racism that existed in that community. And Othello is a fairly conservative community. And back then, the Chicano community was pretty small. And so, I mean, the African Americans were treated, you know, the same way or probably worse. And so we had a lot of similarities. The majority of our communities were low income. You know, we really didn't have back then much of a middle class or upper class, and especially in Washington State. In Texas, California, there were more, the Chicano community was a little bit more advanced. I mean, they at least had some professionals, you know, they had doctors, lawyers, and they were still treated bad. In Washington State, the Chicano community in the 50s, 60s, most of the people that lived in here, or the Mexican community that lived in the state, were mostly farm workers. And so we didn't have a middle class. You know, we didn't have, you know, lawyers. We didn't have doctors. We didn't have architects. And so we were treated like, you know, we were basically a second-class community.